The two gentlemen that I have the pleasure of sharing the stage with right now, Arlen Orchard, the CEO and General Manager of SMUD, and David Wright, the General Manager of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, really are two of the people that have the task of putting some of that policy into place. As Drew talked about, Senate Bill 100, your organizations, LADWP, the largest municipal power company in the United States, SMUD, one of the largest, you're on the front lines of this. As you project out to meet those goals 20 years down the road, and then by 2045, how does your integrated resource planning play a factor in meeting those essential steps that need to take place to tackle the challenges around the water energy nexus? And Arlen, why don't we start with you?
Okay, sure, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. So in the old days, an integrated resource plan was about making sure you had electricity and capacity in order to meet the needs of your customers on a day-to-day basis. It's evolved into looking at how do you meet very aggressive California carbon goals, so that becomes a co-equal driver in the plan. So we developed a 20-year plan, and we recognized that, and by the way, we have more aggressive carbon goals in the state of California. We plan to be carbon neutral by 2040 as part of our plan. But we also recognize that this plan is going to cost our customers a lot of money. It's just the fact. You're going to need to invest in new technologies, new renewables, et cetera. So we really moved far beyond just looking at supply and carbon to really also look at how can we maximize the local benefits in developing our plan. So it's about $7 billion. So we looked at, is there an economic play in this? Can we also improve air quality? Can we jumpstart building electrification, et cetera? Can we help disadvantaged communities be more sustainable through the money we're spending and investing in this plan? So our plan is about roughly $7 billion. About $4 billion of it is new renewables. At least half of them we plan to be local renewables. There's a job benefit associated with that. We've got about $800 million in there for storage, because you're going to need a lot of storage, because that's a lot of solar in our area at the end of the investment plan. And then the one that I'm actually most excited about is about $2 billion of investment in building and transportation electrification. Those two things are the things that really will make the difference in the lives of our customers and the communities we serve. As part of that, we've already started making inroads. We are looking at, we began negotiating deals with developers for all new electric developments, all new multifamily electric developments. We invest currently about $6 million a year in electric transportation. We are moving that to $10 million next year, and $20 million the following year. So we're making very substantial investments in trying to create this low carbon future. The good thing about that for us, the investment in electrification, and if you're going to meet California's carbon goals, you have to electrify almost everything, that's also new revenue for us. So right now, utilities are facing flat or declining load because of energy efficiency and customer-owned generation, mainly solar. That's not a bad thing at all, but it does create financial pressures on utilities. So the ability to increase the product we sell substantially will, around, if our numbers work out, 2025, 2026, we'll start to see an uptick in the amount of electricity we sell.
That's a nice co-benefit there.
Yeah, it's an important one if you want to be financially sustainable in the long run.
Saving the planet and making a little money, that doesn't hurt.
And I'll hold my remarks about how we're engaging the public on that. But,
we'll talk about that as we go on.
I'll leave off there.
David, what's the Los Angeles perspective on this? How are you going to accomplish these long-term goals?
So first, we do create a 20-year plan, and we were talking just the other day about that 20-year plan is shifting every year so substantially that we do think we're kind of at a place where it's levelized. I don't think California can go a lot faster if we really want to supply reliable energy to the state. And it does give us that benchmark. But the last 5 to 10 years, it shifted so much. And Southern California, at least, I think Northern California as well, have experienced such climate extremes that we're like, you know what we planned for 3 years ago, it's completely shifted, not completely, but it shifted. We had a day in the summer when it was hotter in Santa Monica than Palm Springs in August. I mean, the things have gone very, very crazy, if you will. I like that the state has set goals, but the way Arlen reaches his goals in Northern California and Southern California, we are very different in how we need to get there. Again, some of the local supplies versus more regional and in fact intrastate power supplies, we don't have the room to put anything really in the LA basin that would get us to the levels of local renewables that perhaps the Sacramento area can. So we are looking at a significant investment in our transmission system. We really, to get to the renewable goals that we're setting, need about 500 miles of regional transmission to enable us to bring in the renewable resources we need. Trying to build a transmission line in California takes a long, long time. So we're literally trying to figure out not just our plan, but how we engage the basically electeds to understand that to meet these goals, there's a lot of things that they might not think. You don't think to get renewable energy, you've got to build hundreds and hundreds of miles of transmission lines. We also look, because we are an electric and water utility, so we look at the different resources and the different, amount of energy and emissions that it takes to get there. And just a couple of facts, because it is kind of interesting. Out of 4 resources we have, we get water from the Owens Valley, which is 100 miles or so below Lake Tahoe. There's 0 emissions from that. It's all gravity fed. That's about a quarter of our resources. At the other end, we get water from Metropolitan Water District that comes on the State Water Project, which again comes from Northern California, 3,000 kilowatts per acre foot, which is like 5 or 6 households. If you use recycled water, it's about half that total. If you use local groundwater, it's about 75% below that. So we really look at our mix of water supply to determine what the emissions and again what the cost is, and have created some very ambitious goals of renewable supplies and groundwater supplies over the next 30 years, because we've got to utilize that so we can reduce the energy we're using for pumping. So again, looking at every resource and trying to figure out how to utilize the lowest carbon emission resource, which means we've got to take we've got to utilize conservation to completely shift our resource mix. And it's pretty substantial. We're going from 50% imported water from the State Water Project to 20% over 20 or 30 years. So very substantial change. And again, putting the integrated resource plan for power with basically the integrated resource plan for water, and utilizing both of those to determine the maximum reduction in carbon emissions.
I think this is such a fascinating discussion, because even though you're both working towards those same goals, the methodology of how you're going to get there is very different. And Arlen, did you have something that you wanted to add to that, or?
No, I'd just say it's an interesting, because you have the benefit of, I'll say it's a benefit of also being the water supplier. With the Water Energy Nexus, the challenge for us is that we've got 18 different water companies that we have to work with. So when we're trying to coordinate climate change goals and efficiency goals between them, it's a bit of herding cats when you're doing it. We've had a fair amount of success in doing that, and it's both ways, quite frankly, because we have a large hydro project, so water is essential to us. We use about 3,600 acre feet a year for our power plants, but pumping just in the Sacramento region, just for pumping between water agencies and agriculture, is more than 200 gigawatt hours a year. So it's substantial. It's a substantial part of what happens at peak, which is where the dirtiest power comes in. So part of it's education and getting water providers and agricultural concerns to shift their pumping away from that peak dirtiest power period also. So it's an interesting challenge.
And I assume you're seeing something very similar in Los Angeles as well, in your pumping needs to move water around.
Exactly, looking at what, because you don't have to pump water 24 hours a day. So how we utilize pumping water and moving it through our system to get it to the reservoirs throughout the entire system to reduce, again, that dirtiest hours, as Arlen said.
So much of today's conference is focused around innovation, how we're tackling these societal challenges. Let's bring it back to the customer. Both of your organizations are so customer focused. How are each of you engaging your customer to accomplish some of these 20-year goals that you've laid out? And David, why don't we start with you?
Our goal is to bombard them with information. I mean, literally, it's but really tied to something that we can partner with them to help reduce their water supply. We did a turf reduction program. I mean, it really turns into rebates and education primarily, and we've created a number of programs, and you know, they are pretty standard. You know, there are toilets, washing machines, and outside. The majority of use in Southern California is, and I think it's probably true in Sacramento, 50, 60%, sometimes 70% of water used at a household is outside. So for single-family homes, we've really got to reduce the amount of outside irrigation that they're utilizing. And I mean, because the amount of reduction can be so significant so fast, and then the associated reduction with pumping and emissions and everything related to that just goes away. So we had thousands of households change out their landscaping. Landscaping also works to a point with commercial customers, but we do a lot of looking at their chillers, and that's a primary area there. And then we have a lot of multifamily. About half of our customers are multifamily homes. So working with the multifamily home development community to, again, put everything as efficient and reduced utilization, reduced use, if you will. I was at an event last night. We literally had shower heads, aerators that were single, direction, aerators that went all different directions, aerators that you could adjust on your faucets, just everything that you can use. And some of the rebates are, really substantial, paying for half of a washing machine and a lot of things, which really does move the needle very quickly.
And that's for lower income, or is that market rate?
That's for market, and then we do more for lower income.
Okay. Arlen, what are you doing to engage customers?
So a lot of the same stuff. I mean, I break it down to, the first is kind of what you'd classically call advertising and marketing. So everything from wrapping buses with our messaging to billboards, radio and television advertisements, to a big use of social media, developing videos that we have online for our customers. That would be kind of your classic way of doing it. The other is the products and services that we offer, very much like LA does. We've rolled out an e-commerce site that that has been really successful. We've done $2 million of sales in about less than 2 years at this point. It's been a great way to actually deliver energy efficiency and water conservation measures at a very cost-effective price point. On that one, we've partnered with the city of Sacramento, which is the largest water provider in the area. So we've aligned their rebate program with our offerings on our e-commerce site to sell energy conservation measures to help them meet their conservation goals. The other one is, the other two are, I'd say, again, education. We've developed, quite frankly, curriculum for schools to talk about climate change and how to create more energy efficiency. So that's one way we've done it. We've also just recently We start training contractors, because as we try to electrify everything, contractors tend to be focused on what they historically know, so gas-fired hot water heaters. So we need to educate them on electricity-driven hot water heaters. Until you educate them about the benefits of that, they're not going to carry them on their truck. So we're doing that type of education. And then we're trying to back it up even more. Sacramento is building a children's science center, and we're the naming partner in that, specifically because we will be able to support a climate change education component of that, so that you're starting, you got to pipeline all of this stuff from an early age. We found if you get the kids to do it, they bug the crap out of their parents until they do it. So it's actually pretty effective.
I'm so glad you're saying that, because that's what Eric and Mark were talking about this morning in terms of how we educate the next generation of customers to influence the current generation of customers. And so that leads to this empowerment idea that we've been talking about today. And the empowerment's really going to come through the benefits of a cleaner, more sustainable system. As you're educating your customers, what have been some of those key benefits that you've really been promoting out into through your advertisement in Sacramento and LA? And Arlen, why don't we start with you?
Okay, sure. So for us, it's really been kind of focused on the IRP I started talking about,
Sure.
because there's substantial clean air benefits if you reduce the tailpipe emissions, which in the state is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gases. So we educate them on that. We educate them on the economic development benefits that we're bringing, and the benefits to disadvantaged communities. But at the end of the day, it's also a lot of education about how they can save money, because at the end of the day, many of our customers, that is still their number one priority. How do I save money? While they support environmental goals, they want to make sure that they're not being bombarded. So a lot of education around, here's the tools you can use, here's the support we can give you. For our business customers, we have strategic account advisors that go out and work with individual companies to really make sure they're as efficient as possible. And it's more than just change out your lighting, it's really down to what is your manufacturing process, and are there things we can do to help you be more efficient? We've done that with data centers, et cetera, because the more we can reduce that, again, we're going to be moving the carbon dial, which is what this is really all about at the end of the day.
That's a great point, and you brought up lighting. That's been the low-hanging fruit for driving energy efficiency for the last decade. But because it's low-hanging fruit, it's gone. So what's the next step of energy efficiency? And David, I'm interested to hear your perspective on those benefits, and maybe you can touch on that as well.
Certainly. One of the most interesting things in LA was they hadn't performed a really intensive insulation program of homes. And much of our service territory is in an inland valley where it's very warm in the summer. So we've really focused on that. Multifamily housing that houses anyone low income to medium income is insulated for free. We do have the gas company who partners with us on some of that, but we just move forward with that because we found that for the cost benefit, if we over the next 5 years can insulate, we can really reduce energy use. In the summer, it can reduce energy use 10 and 15% just through an insulated home. So because we're in the LA basin, some of the messaging is about reducing emissions, cleaning the air, resonates a little more closely. I grew up and continue to live in the LA basin, and air quality and smog is like the number one topic, or it was the number one topic for a long time, and it's kind of coming back because the air actually is not cleaning up as fast as the predictions have been. A lot of engagement. You mentioned about empowerment, and one of the things that, so there's empowerment for customers, but there's also our obligation to do what's easy, what's simple, what makes our customer lives easier. And I think that expectation is there. And some of the most simple things, using water obviously uses energy. So when it's raining, we send out, Twitter, social, all sorts of social media, just very simple. Turn off your sprinklers based on the rain. You can turn them on in a week. And that reminder is so beneficial and so easy for us to do, and can double and triple the number of customers that actually go out and do that. Because I know even myself, I'll get to work and I'm like, oh, I should have turned my sprinklers off. If I got that message at 7 in the morning, run out there and do it. So I do think we have that we have the empowerment side, but we also have that, hey, give us some, we need to take some more responsibility. And, and when I say tell, it's really here's a helpful hint. You might want to do this, but at the end of the day, you're going to save money. So they like us sending messages and reminding them anything they can do very easily to save some cash.
That's such a great point, and there's a lot of studies that show that as utilities engage with their customers in exactly that fashion, it builds that brand equity, which traditionally hadn't been the top priority for utilities, but over the last 3-5 years and projecting out into the future, as you're talking about how electricity load growth is projected to rise, making sure that you've properly engaged with your customer, that they see you as that trusted partner, is really essential. Let's stay in this realm, but talk a little bit briefly about electric vehicles. You've both mentioned air quality as a huge driver of your goals and your agenda. Can you tell me a little bit about each of your individual EV programs as you look out over the next decade? And Arlen, why don't you start?
So, as I said, we have a strong commitment, and have had a strong commitment to EVs since the early 1990s. I think we were the first utility in the country to actually invest in electric vehicles. They were 3-wheeled electric vehicles. We had a genius idea of lending them out to our customers to drive. It was a great idea until we discovered when they went around the corner, they tipped over and rolled. They've come a long way since then, let's just say, folks. That and a Tesla are really the two extremes. But today, we're really focused on all aspects of mobility. It's just not getting an electric vehicle on the road.
Right.
It's supporting things like shared mobility to address the access to transportation in disadvantaged communities. So on the EV front, we have a charge-free for 2-year incentive for people buying EVs. We have installed DC fast charging stations. We're supporting workplace charging. Our regional transit organization is looking at converting all of its buses to electric buses over the next 5 to 7 years. They're in a cash crunch to do that. So we are essentially talking to them about charging as a service, where we would manage all of their charging. We'd install the charging infrastructure for them. They would pay us a fee to manage that, as well as obviously for the electricity. We are Uber's first utility partner to test out more Uber electric vehicles. So the deal we struck with Uber was for their electric vehicle drivers. We pay that driver a little bit above the normal rate to drive an electric vehicle around town, because Uber drivers drive a lot, so you get more exposure to the community. We're supporting a company called Envoy, which is a shared mobility company that is really focused on disadvantaged communities and how do you start to crack that last mile issue that you find in those communities. So it really is, and then Sacramento's been blessed because we were chosen as Volkswagen's Green City. So Volkswagen is investing $44 million over a 3-year period in different types of e-mobility. So it's an exciting time, and this is kind of something that we're very committed to. We really think it's the thing that really makes a huge difference in our community if you can start to solve these mobility issues and what the future of mobility looks like.
Absolutely, and I think that's, that program that you have with Uber is something that's really canny, because what's one of the biggest challenges that consumers say when they're making that decision? Do I get the electric vehicle? I'm not sure I have the range. Well, if an Uber driver can do that all day, certainly you can, as a consumer, maybe driving your car an hour a day can eliminate some of that range anxiety. What about you, David? What are you seeing?
We're doing many of the same things that SMUD is doing. Some different variations. We're offering rebates for used electric vehicles. We're looking at adding new electric vehicles, but what we're looking at and hearing is that when the original purchaser of a new vehicle is done with his or her electric vehicle, there's not a strong market for the used vehicles to the level that there needs to be. And in fact, as we looked out and saw our low-income customers were nervous about buying an electric vehicle, not just because of the charging issues, but because it's new technology. And if you're struggling to buy a $10,000 car, the last thing you're going to do is take something and buy something that you're not as comfortable with. So we found that's been very successful. We're hanging chargers on our power poles in our lower income neighborhoods because they're mostly rentals. Most of those are renting, and landlords aren't putting in chargers. I mean, if you've got an 80-year-old house, cut into 8 units, the last thing that landlord's going to do, though we pay essentially 100% of the charger, is start getting into the electric system of that home, because that just means you're likely going to have to replace everything. You know what I mean? It's once you touch once you touch a 100-year-old house, okay, everything needs fixing. So we're also looking at vacant land. There's a lot of very small plots that LEWP owns around the city, and we're looking at, can we take some of those lots that are in residential neighborhoods and turn them into charging stations? Kind of on that same thought, but on a larger scale, downtown LA is looking at eliminating cars. Cars coming in, they're like a congestion charge like they have in London, but they're trying to look at the long term of just not allowing cars in downtown. So the thought is, maybe on the way there, very much like your Uber approach, we're putting a charging station. We owned a parking lot with 80 parking stalls, so we're going to put a charging station. It's right on the edge of downtown, so that, especially at night, if you're in LA, everything is Uber. So we can encourage the electric vehicles at the same time that the mayor would like to eliminate all vehicles. Can we use that as kind of a movement towards his goal? But we're looking at some various things as well. And if you think of the charging needs to be during the day. That's when we have excess energy. The perfect world, if we do that during this time when vehicles can still come into the downtown LA area, that you get to is, this isn't tomorrow, but 10 years ago, you drive, your driverless vehicle drives you to work, you go to your office, your vehicle automatically sets a time at that charging station, an appointment. It drives itself to the charging station, charges, drives back because you've said you have to be here at 3 in the parking space. And we all of a sudden are able to charge all those vehicles at peak, and it's no inconvenience to our customers. In fact, it's a real convenience. So it is that kind of thinking of ways that we can approach something that's going to totally change, and it's going to totally change in a not too long period of time, considering how we invest in power. I mean, when we invest in something, it's usually 20, 30 years. And so can we look at what the investments are going to be and what the use is going to be and how we can meet both our goals, political goals. And it does get complicated, and yet at the same time, it's kind of simple. Hang a charger on a pole in a primarily rental neighborhood. And you're going to encourage people to buy a vehicle because they're going to also get a rebate. There is one other site. We have 2 ports, the Port of LA, which is our service territory, the Port of Long Beach, which is immediately adjacent, where more than half the goods in the western United States come into those 2 ports. Then they get to kind of the inland area around Ontario Airport, if you've ever been there. And we're working with Edison because they're the other major service provider and trying to figure out how do we electrify the transportation of those containers for that 50-mile trip. And I mean, there's a lot of ideas because there's no heavy-duty electric dressage vehicles yet. But is there a way we can figure out? I had said, well, gosh, if we could have the bullet train, money that would just take the canister. That might work. But it actually is kind of, can we figure out, a rail approach. Do we need that? Can we add a lane to the freeway? Can we put it down the middle of the freeway? Can we just get chargers, at both ends and wait for trucks to exist? Can we put, overhead wires? We're trying to look at everything because it's such a huge amount of emissions come from that transportation of goods just in that small little area, and it's a horrific traffic nightmare. So, we created a group of about 80 participants that are all focused on, from every aspect of looking at how we do a project like that.
California has really been a vocal leader in the move towards tackling climate change in the United States. It's running countercurrent to the national climate.
Yeah.
Can you talk to the audience a little bit about some of the regional challenges when it comes to the water energy nexus that California is experiencing, and how those regional challenges leads to some more innovative thinking? And David, I think you're probably having to do both water and power would be a great person to start this conversation off.
So again, a lot of our challenges are the import of both of our resources. And how do we minimize the amount of resources that we need to import? So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to do everything we can, local solar, battery storage, anything we can to reduce that import of power. But again, the reality is there isn't space to put large solar projects very close. We have really the closest is about 100 miles away as you go over the mountains and into the desert, where you can put some of those larger projects. Water is, again, today the same. We're importing over 75% of our water. That regional aspect is how do we just eliminate demand in our area. But we get power from 6 states or transmit power through 6 states in the western United States. So, we do have a regional impact and a regional issue that we've got to consider. We then have state goals, and kind of one of the interesting things is, we've had wildfires that have been phenomenal. There's a lot of dead wood. The state of California calls the burning of that wood a renewable resource. How regionally, do we look at then helping the state to meet goals? There's not really many forests in Southern California. There's a few. They're mostly in Northern California. But we look also at how our region, it's where does the region end? The region really for us ends in California, but we're impacting a number of other states. And there's a big crossover as for us as, again, there's the Southern LA Basin, there's our service territory, but we go so far out of that. And most people might not know, but there's about 100,000 people. Whole Owens Valley is served by LADWP for their power. So we even have kind of a looking at another part of the state that is our region. So really, again, the key thing is just how do we reduce usage, because that's the major resource benefit, a major regional benefit.
David spoke very eloquently about the Southern California challenges to this regional approach. What about what's going on in Northern California and Sacramento?
So again, part of it is you've got 18 water purveyors. So just regionally, there's some regional organizations that that the water purveyors and SMUD are involved in. We did a study with the Regional Water Agency, which covers actually 24 water agencies, so it extends beyond us, in 2014 to look at both the water intensity of energy production and the energy intensity of water. And really, it was a great way to lay out some collaborative steps that we could make towards conservation. So that's a good example of kind of a collaborative environment that you can build, but you can't do it in a silo. When I think about any of the goals that we want to accomplish, it really is based on collaboration with either a customer group or nonprofits or the water agencies to kind of identify what are those common goals and outcomes that you are trying to achieve, and then try to figure out a plan you can work on it together. It is a challenge when you look at the energy world, because California, see if I can say this gently, is very California-centric.
Sure.
And it's challenging because the way the grid actually works, most of the energy in the West, we're the load sink. So the other 6 or 8 states that are part of the Western grid, their entire energy output or demand isn't as much as California's. So there is a little bit of a disconnect as you think about how are we going to integrate more renewables across these 8 states. If you have a strong California preference for California-only renewables, it creates a lot of challenge. And we're starting to see that now when in the April or in the spring and the fall, where you have excess generation, solar generation. The California Independent System Operator is paying other states to take that power during those times of the day. So it's figuring out how do you soak that up. David alluded to that. Part of that is getting perhaps water companies to shift their pumping to that period of time where pricing is really, really favorable, and it's all green because we have excess solar. So you need to really kind of look at that from a regional standpoint and figure out what policies can you put in place to be able to accomplish that.
Arlen, it's because we've been in the industry for a while. It's been so interesting to see. We used to tell customers, turn everything off in the afternoon. Don't use anything. And now we're like, use everything that you want to in the afternoon. I mean, and trying to engage customers who have been told one thing, and over a pretty short period of time, I'm told, everything we told you, forget it. We're going to tell you something different. And you do worry about, okay, next time we have to shift things a little bit, are they going to believe us? Because if you can't tell somebody one thing and 5 years later say, we guess, sorry, oops, never mind. It's kind of crazy. And I do worry that if we're so successful at like electric vehicle charging stations in the afternoon, we'll be like, you know what, now we need you to not send your vehicle to the charging station.
And don't use them in July when it's hot,
exactly.
Because that's a bad time to use them, yeah.
But I think we are educating customers on how we are changing and that we are changing. And that's the one thing I do know customers do understand. Things are shifting a lot. And so at least there's that little bit of, hey, we do believe you. There's some credibility because we do know things are changing.
We talked at the start of this conference about how 19% of energy consumption is used in the processing, treatment, and movement of water. Are we going to be, in California, is that number going to come down, or is it just a matter of making everything greener?
So I believe that's going to come down because we're just going to eventually price the top tiers of water to keep, really large areas green to a point, except for probably group recreation, to a point where it's going to change and drive it down. I'll tell you what, I know this isn't shared by everyone. I'm not in fact, I'm not a fan of desalinization. Obviously, as a last choice, but that is so energy intensive. And it's just so ridiculous that we would let fresh water go out to the ocean and then go, oh, we have to desalinate it. When you go, let's figure out how to stop it before it goes there, because that's way less expensive, but even more important, way more environmentally friendly than running desalinization plants. And again, and even if you put one in place, you don't usually, this isn't true everywhere, but you don't usually use it except every 4, 5, 7 years. And when you need it, you need it. But we in California have enough water, we have enough groundwater basins, we have enough wastewater treatment plants producing water that is fine to recycle and recharge. And we've got to, we really have to look at doing what's right, what's the least expensive, and it will reduce demand for water, which will again reduce the energy burden associated with water. And if we don't do that, we're stupid. I mean, it's just it's that much. And we do there's the water shame. LA Times actually had here's the water shaming article this week of who's using a ton of water. And in a way that should happen for people that just abuse it. We had a couple that one owned a 5-acre parcel in Bel Air next to the partner who owned a 5-acre parcel in Bel Air, and the couple were, they had 2 accounts, but those 2 together were our highest residential use customer. They had 10 acres of lawn adjacent to a national forest. And so I was like, well, yeah, water shame them because but again, at some point, you can't water shame someone who's in a 2,000 square foot house on a 8,000 square foot lot. That just isn't the way to do it correctly.
Well, clearly, that you can't shame people. You can't solely shame people. You can provide incentives for good behavior as well. As we conclude this session, there are no easy answers to this. This is a seismic challenge that is going to require many stakeholders. But from the utility perspective, what is 1 or 2 things that that you're working on right now that is going to help contribute to solving the biggest issues related to the water-energy nexus?
Well, I'll just say that for us, it is about creating collaboration and partnerships and deeply educating and engaging our customers. So as we look at carbon, we've created tools for our customers that actually they can go on and figure out whether an electric vehicle makes sense for them based on their driving patterns, whether we have a Solar Answers website which a customer can go on and model their specific roof to determine whether the orientation and stuff makes sense for them from a solar standpoint. That kind of level of engagement with your customers, I think, is going to be incredibly necessary and important to achieve these goals because we can't do it on our own. You really need to change customers' behavior, change their buying habits, et cetera, so that deep level of engagement. When you think about who your partners are, I can tell you that 15 years ago, we would have never dreamed about partnerships with faith-based organizations and going out to neighborhood associations on a very regular basis. And, they become part of your spreading the gospel, so to speak, when you engage them and create partnerships. So I think it really is all about collaboration and engaging your customers in a really deep and meaningful way, which is something quite frankly, historically, utilities have not been as good at as other organizations. But I think that just in the last probably 5 to 7 years, if you look at what LA has done or what SMUD has done, we've jumped miles from where we were in customer engagement. So I'd say that, to me, that's the number 1 thing is customer engagement going forward and identifying those key partners in your communities.
David?
I absolutely concur with just everything wholeheartedly that Arlen said. In the priorities that he said, it is the collaboration that we need to be looking at. And it is collaboration not just with water and electric utilities. Gas utilities are part of that effort. We haven't done as much collaboration. We didn't need IOUs and publicly owned utilities didn't even collaborate. I've met more with Edison in the last, and I should say the rest of the utilities, but primarily we meet with Edison more last few years than I ever did in the last 20 years, or even saw them at a meeting. And we get together, we talked about wildfires as a collaborative group, again, because of there's so many issues surrounding that. I talked with the gas company yesterday who are saying, you're looking at all this electrification of buildings. And she actually said, we really don't have many programs, and we're asking the state to regulate us to regulate. First of all, I couldn't get past to regulate us, but getting towards, if we can conserve, maybe that's a better cost benefit over the next few decades than spending all the money on electrification. We do like the electrification from a revenue standpoint, obviously. However, from a state and a consumer standpoint, how do we do this the best, the least cost, the maximum benefit? And through some of these collaborations, that's on the utility side, the collaborations with the community, collaborations with startup companies. I think we're going to get to meeting our goals very quickly, but we do have to open up that thought of how do we talk to people who we never used to and interact and create mutual goals. It's just an interesting approach.
Well, I think that that is such an appropriate way to conclude this panel as we have focused on empowerment, education, and engagement. The utility becomes the central hub of that collaboration point. David, Arlen, wonderful comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Grab your water.